Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Things We Know. I'm Lisa Callahan.
And I'm Kari Morin, and we are thrilled to be here again with you.
Yeah, Kari and I have a pretty juicy topic today, and we think you're going to love it.
Yes. Should we say grab the Kleenex? It's all about emotions and emotional bypassing, but how important it is to feel them all.
Yeah, we got on this topic. I'm going to pull something up on my phone because this topic came to us because of a meme. I guess that's what it's called. I'm showing my age.
My kids roll their eyes every time I say the word
sure,
meme.
like, is it a meme? Like, what am I looking at?
Is it exactly? A GIF or a GIF, Mom?
100%. Oh my God. Yeah. Sometimes I just can't help but be 53.
Sometimes I do it purposely.
Well, also that for sure. I love doing hashtag something. And then they just like Charlotte in particular is like, seriously.
Right.
Okay. So here's the meme, I think. It says, the people who constantly enforce good vibes only, quote unquote, and reject any emotion other than happiness will end up suffering in the long run. It's actually a very positive thing to hold loving space for negative and heavy emotions.
Oh, yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. And I think that is so true. That resonated for me because it's so different than the way we grew up. And we touched on this in a previous episode. So different because I think I grew up really thinking in order to be successful and to be liked and to belong somewhere, you should be positive. You should be bringing your best self, and your best self should be positive and something good to offer. And that implied for me that you should always be good. You should always be great. You should always say, can't complain. I had an aunt who would say that all the time, or, that too blessed to be stressed, or I'm blessed. And we'd be like, you're sick. How could you say that? Right. But like really, truly thinking that was what I should emulate. I should just have nothing to complain about and always be good.
Yeah. Nothing to complain about. And if I did, it wouldn't make a difference or something like that. That's something my dad used to say. Can't complain. And if I did, what would make a difference? Yeah.
Right.
No, 100%. And I think, to sit in this space of happiness only, right? Good vibes only. Like, that's boring.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, variety, what the fuck is that?
Variety is the spice of life. So, and I said this in our last pod when we were talking about the things we wish we knew, which is that not having your emotions and trying to tamp them down or resist them is futile, and so if you try to always buck up, little soldier, like it's going to come back to bite you in the ass. No,
or come out because you've stuffed it down. It didn't go away.
Oh, 100%. And
it's going to come out like the alien in Aliens.
That's what I picture. It's going to come out and not just picture, I've experienced, right? It comes out in the most inopportune times, passive aggressive ways. You could be angry or sad or frustrated about something completely different, but it comes out and of course it always comes out at the person that it's not meant to come out at.
Totally. Speaking of another, I don't know if it was a meme or something that went around on the interwebs, but that does remind me real quick of, here, I'll have my glass to demonstrate. Like, what's in your glass? What's in your cup, right? And if you keep good stuff in there and someone bumps into you, only good stuff will spill out, right? Like, there was this idea that probably the intention is good. Like, what we're saying is if you're allowing stuff and you're healthy, then you're not going to be triggered to just, lose it, like you said. But I think what they meant was only have good stuff to say.
Yeah, that makes me want to punch somebody in the throat.
But it's true, right? Like, right. This is what you're saying is true. And I mean, in a really sad, serious note, because it's okay to be sad. I was just coaching someone who was talking about how she really believes her brother got sick with stomach cancer because they had no predispositions to it, because he stuffed all his feelings down. He was always keeping his emotions in. And she's got a real passion to really be aware of that more in her life with people she knows and loves and works with. And it's because of that very thing, right? Because he's of the generation that he's maybe even a little older than I am, that was raised to just, find emotions inconvenient and sort of stuff them down so that you can be successful.
Well, I mean, Louise Hay, her whole, first off, I want to presence the fact that we said this isn't a coaching pod, and yet we talk. I mean, it is what it is. We are coaches. We can't help it. And so much of the things we know comes because we've done this training, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, I think of like Louise Hay, like she's got her whole, like the godmother of coaching and all of this,
Mhm.
and being able to have any pain in your body and be able to look up and see what that's caused from. I
True.
100% believe that when you hold things, it shows up in a physical manifestation, no question.
So true. And man, when I was growing up, often and in relationships, I was told I was too emotional. Don't be so emotional. So I gotta say, I feel like I have a degree in the importance of feelings because I tried it all. I tried to like mask them. I tried to, be okay and put on a good face. You know me, Lisa. Anyone who knows me knows I'm pretty transparent. So when I actually recently even, and I've done a lot of work over time, and not just because I'm a coach, but because I had to survive
Right.
and really learn how to be in the world when, my heart is on my sleeve, but I also, I also have goals and ambitions and I know what I deserve. I loved recently when this was kind of reaffirmed for me, where I'm pretty sure it was an Atlas of the Heart, Brene Brown's latest work, or the latest work I know about anyway, was that, we grew up in a time where there was this distinction that we are thinking beings and emotions were inconvenient. My husband totally, like really until recently, admits that that's kind of how he operated, got through med school feeling like people who got emotional in the OR didn't have their shit together and they might make a mistake, right? And so obviously there's a time to manage your emotions, but all the more reason to allow them so you know how to manage them, right?
Right.
But what she said is, in truth, we are emotional beings. It's really obvious by nature, right? Just as we are emotional beings, and our thoughts can actually really distort reality. So yes, we have access to logic, but if we ignore emotions, we are being inhuman with ourselves. And that really affirmed for me, how I live in the world and how I operate. And I really appreciated that we live in a time now where it's clear if you want to live an authentic life, you need to allow pain and trust your emotions are here to help you learn and grow. And if I may, I just want to share when my kids were born and we did baptisms for them, I remember my brother-in-law, who's a Jesuit, asked us to write a message to our children. And I remember some version with all three saying something like, I don't wish you a happy life. I know that sounds strange. I wish you an authentic life. And the people here and the people you're going to meet are going to be an important part of that because we're human. We need each other. And you're going to stumble and you're going to learn how to ask for help and how to depend on people and see your value in their eyes. And it's the hard stuff that's going to show you what you're made of and really build your self-esteem so that you can experience joy, right? That was
I think it
great
also
talk.
shows you that's so good. I love that. I love Jesuits. I am a recovering Catholic at best, but if I've got to be a Catholic, it would be Jesuit. I also think it shows you who those are those moments when you are vulnerable, when you do share emotion, when you are authentic and your friends step up versus the ones that hide. Now, some hide because they also can't deal with their emotions, right? Like we'll talk, grief is a beautiful example of that. When somebody's grieving, some people just can't, and that's okay. And when you're able to share with friends and they stand by your side and they allow you to be witnessed in that emotion, whatever it is, happy, sad, mad, those are your true people.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I just got chills. I love chills.
I love chills.
Yeah.
So let's talk about emotions and what they can each teach us. So why don't we start with bittersweetness?
I love this one so much for a lot of reasons, but mainly because you and I speak the language of music. And also just because I think that that's, again, one of those things we know, that you don't have light without darkness. You can't even appreciate life unless you sat in the darkness. You don't have joy without pain. You can't fully appreciate the good times without really understanding the depth of the bad times. And so I love bittersweetness because it's that, it encompasses that thing called necessary losses. You just went through it when Liam moved away. I went through it when Peter moved away. There's these necessary losses that happen in life, because ultimately that could be the title of this episode. Everything is temporary, everything.
Oh my God.
So
Yes.
if we can like grab onto joy when we have it, with time and wisdom, we realize like, oh, on the other side of this joy is a fleeting bit of, time. And so this is beautiful. He's graduating and he's leaving, or, he's moving out and I won't see him every day. So I think just bittersweetness, gosh, in every aspect of life might be my favorite emotion, because it lets me feel everything all at once.
I love that. I love that you said everything's temporary, because when Liam, I forget what it was. It might have been actually, I feel like we had already moved to LA, but we were back in Chicago visiting. And one of my best friends, Steve, Liam was going through some shit. And he was, and Steve is their unofficial godfather. And he takes, and he's Uncle Steve. So he takes his role very seriously, which I love. And he had a big, deep conversation with Liam around everything is temporary. And Liam has repeatedly said that was a turning point for him when Steve had that conversation with him. And then Steve has since had that conversation with Charlotte around everything is temporary. Because when you're a teenager, everything's monumental, right? And so it was coming from somebody our age to say, I got you. Like, yeah, this fucking sucks. And this too shall pass. And not in an emotional bypassing way, but just as a guiding light, so to speak,
Totally. Oh, I love that. That reminds me really quick that I have a really good friend, Nia, who's from Ireland originally. She's hilarious. And she has a way of like, we'll all sit with that stuff. But to make it temporary, or to acknowledge that it's temporary, she kind of introduced that thing from the Muppets. Like when things are getting really dark and we have to get up and go somewhere and do something fun, she'll go, mana, mana.
Oh, no.
It's such a good state change. It's such
a good state change.
We sat in the darkness and we could sit here longer, but we can't. How do we do that? Oh, sorry.
Damn it. All right. Sorry, everyone. Kari just gave you an earworm, and my apologies. And don't hold it against me.
Give us a new one. We're on bittersweetness, so we got to talk about music. Give us a new one.
Right. Oh, okay. So yes. So we were talking about this. You start, because before we got on the pod, you said you heard. Well, you heard the thing about sad songs. So tell that a little bit.
I'm going to go back and find the exact fact, because I'm the age I am. I can't remember it exactly, but I want to find it and I'll put it on the Facebook page. Okay. But basically, that as much as humans connect to their emotions through song, motivation songs, happy songs, joy songs, pump it up songs, it's times 800. Like, if they listen to a song, like a happy song once, they'll listen to a sad song 800 times that, because some number like that. I'm going to embarrass myself if it's something a little different, but it's exponentially more, because it demonstrates that humans who maybe aren't comfortable expressing emotions or even naming their emotions are finding connection to their emotions in song.
I love that. Well, I mean, again, we're not dating ourselves yet, because this is only if somebody goes back and listens to this 5 years from now. But, for me, and maybe it is because I can access sad. I have never had a problem crying. I think people think people who know me outside of like maybe just through social media or whatever are surprised that I'm sad. Or can be sad, or that I'm a crier. Like when I tell people that don't know me very well that I'm a crier, they're like, no, that doesn't feel right. Oh my God, I'm such a crier. My kids, Charlotte in particular, she's gotten better, but really hates that. But so for me,
Lisa cries every day.
I cry a lot. I think literally today I was like, I hope I can get through the pods without crying. For me, it's anger. I have like 5 anger playlists. And so that's why when Miley came out with Flowers, that was on repeat, bitches. Like, I love that song. Like that. It's not even about empowerment. I mean, I guess it's sort of a sad song, but not really. It's like she's done being sad. She's gonna, still in wherever that is, Hollywood or whatever. But we wanted to find a song because we had a quote of lyrics last time. So we're going to try to do this every time. So we were thinking about where's a song that talks about emotionally bypassing. And the first one we came up with was The Hurting from Tears for Fears. I mean, talk about a band that like laid it all out. Songs from The Big Chair is like brutal.
Yes.
So many, which I love them for that. I mean, that's, I think, one of the things people who love Tears for Fears totally relate to that. So here's the lyrics we'll quote this time from The Hurting. Could you understand a child when he cries in pain? Could you give him all he needs, or do you feel the same all along? You've been told you're wrong when you felt it right, and you're left to fight the hurting. I mean, literally, even reading that gives me chills.
That gives me chills.
Woo.
It reminds me of something we talked about on another episode, which was, you know, when your feelings aren't validated, you're kind of getting told that your feelings, like, oh, that you're not feeling that. You're fine. You're okay.
Yeah, you're fine.
Right?
I'm fine. Things are fine. Everything's fine.
And how awesome that young people have music when they're not feeling validated, that they can find validation in music. Well, I'll just say that. That's for sure.
No question.
Oh, can we move on to sadness? Because that's making me sad in the best way. I made a note here about the Inside Out movie because I love it. I love that so many of the animated films for my kids were really for me. But
Totally.
What I really love about it, and also because it's like what we do in the world of the work we do, we talk about parts, all of our different parts, right? And that movie brilliantly kind of, you know, took out those, like went into the head of this girl on like Joy is supposed to lead the show, right? Like she's in charge of everything.
Amy Poehler.
And then there was Amy Poehler, and there was sadness, and there was disgust, and there was fear, and there was anger, right? And we're touching on some of those and a few others here. What I loved about the whole freaking point of this movie, this damn movie that made us cry, my kids and I, and I was so happy that my kids got it, was that Joy was really not acknowledging the significance of these other parts of this girl's life, these other roles that these other emotions had to play. And sadness came along and didn't just have sad memories. She validated everything that was coming up along the way. So she happened to be a she voice because it was a she girl, but not all the emotions were, you know, some felt like male voices. But the point being,
I think Louis Black played anger.
Right. So that it was important to just sit with, that is sad. That when your ball got taken away from you, that is sad. And it took that Amy Poehler character, Joy, a lot of, you know, painful learning and you know, mishaps along the way to realize that joy only exists because sadness acknowledges the parts that were really important.
Yeah.
And so I think that sadness has such a gift for us. It really allows us to feel human, allows us to connect with our emotions, with other people, with it's something painful going on in the world. Sadness allows us to just feel okay and know that it's safe to, that we'll survive it. Right. And accessing it, I think, again, gives us the opportunity to move into the next thing. But if you don't, I've seen this a lot, when you don't let yourself feel sad, it's just this edgy thing, like kind of tapping at your shoulder the whole time. So,
yeah, I mean, it's funny because to me, again, this does strike me as something that I've learned as I've gotten older. You know, again, I've always been a crier, but even my children sort of shamed me around that. Not Liam. Liam was always good because he's emotional, but and Charlotte is more so. And I think that's part of what's changed for her. But I'm just a big proponent, and this is true of any emotion that's not, I mean, I'm not walking out every morning going, I'm happy. But if I'm sad or I'm angry, I come out and I say, you know what, guys, I am super fucking pissed today, or I'm feeling really sad. And it's probably not about you, because it usually isn't. A lot of times I don't even know why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. But what I find is naming it and telling them, you get to decide how you want to interact with me. Like, and they don't avoid me, but I'm like, if I bite your head off or whatever, you know, the terms are, it's not about you. Just naming it makes it flow through me in a way. Full disclosure, I am not an unpacker. I don't really want to talk about my shit. I just want to have it flow through me. I think that's my
Yeah.
Enneagram of 7 of just like wanting everything to be fun all the time. But I just don't want to unpack, but I'm happy to have my feelings for sure.
I think that's been a big learning for me this year. Yeah, we talked earlier about like, when we resist something, it gets worse, right?
Mhm.
I used to resist the fact that, some of the humans in my house do not like to talk about their feelings, right? But I was missing the fact that they were processing. One of them plays guitar, one
Right.
of them um, works on his aquarium, or, like people
Yeah.
have the things they do to feel their feelings. They don't always have to talk about them.
Right.
And I think that's been a huge eye-opening thing for me, that I, as someone who is a verbal processor, that everyone has to do that, again, is, not recognizing what people need. And so what you're beautifully demonstrating is like, I feel them. I don't need to talk about them. I've got music, I've got expression, I've got warnings.
Warnings. Yeah. Although it's funny, as you're saying, you said verbal processor, which made me think about the fact my human design is a manifester. One of the things as a manifester is to inform. So I think that's it. Like I walk in, I'm like, everybody, I am pissed.
Yeah.
That's all I need. That's all I need you to know. I am informing you that I am in a bad mood.
And what if that's enough? That's
And
enough.
it totally is.
Totally.
And luckily I live in a house of people who I don't know what, I know what my kid's human design is. I don't know what my husband's is, but that I don't know if it's just because we've been together for so long, but nobody asks me to unpack. Everyone, I have a couple of friends and you're not one of them, but I have a couple of friends who want me to unpack shit. And I'm like, ugh, just let me get through this. I don't want to unpack anything.
Yeah. I don't get asked that in my house. But I'm also a projector. So,
right.
I can pick up on all their stuff, and that's enough. Yeah. Let's talk about this one. Because you brought it up right before we started recording. Unhappiness versus sadness. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, sadness, I think we know what that is, right? That's a deep sort of melancholy, right?
Yeah.
People are sad because of events. People are sad because of grief, which we'll talk about grief in a second. Unhappiness, I feel like I like to use the word ennui, because that is sometimes how I feel. I don't feel sad. I don't feel like crying, but I have this sense of ennui. And sometimes I run across people who want to dismiss their unhappiness because, you and I and our friends are privileged, right? And we have nice houses and our kids go to good schools and we have money and we take vacations. And so on paper, everything looks great. So what do I have to be upset about? Fuck that shit. Like if you are unhappy, and that is okay. Everything can look gorgeous on paper, beautiful. My finances on paper are amazing. And so consequently, I can't get a school loan for my son. And that sucks. So it's like, what's on paper doesn't necessarily correlate with what's inside.
Totally. I love that. So for you, unhappiness can be just really like when things are off.
Yes. Beautiful way of saying it.
Okay.
Absolutely. When things feel just off. And again, I don't discount it because I'm like, I'm feeling this today. I can't explain it. Sometimes I think with the stronger emotions, sadness, anger, you often can identify what's triggering it. And I hate the word trigger, but whatever. But something like unhappiness, that's why I like the word ennui, because I feel like you don't always know.
Right. Okay. In each of these, we could go deeper, but I want to get through some. Anger. You just touched on it a little.
Yeah. So you go, because I already talked about my anger playlist.
It's interesting because I think I want to say right away that I love all the parents my husband and I come from. I knew his dad before he passed away years ago. I mean, my husband was 20 at the time, and I love his stepdad and my mother-in-law. We grew up in very different households. I had parents who were very comfortable expressing emotions and anger, and because they seemed like such equals, they demonstrated, losing a temper and kind of duking it out verbally, not physically, and repairing, right? his parents, he like really barely remembers them ever arguing, but never saw them fight. And was raised, they had 5 kids and they were young parents, just like mine were. And so the best they could do was like, behave and like, again, like all of our generation, be good. Right.
Right.
So when we first got married, if I expressed anger, because in my family, people will explode and sometimes say some nasty shit. And then we're over it. Right. And my sister and I used to do that too. And carpool, people would watch us and be like, holy crap, they're going to beat the shit out of each other. And then by the end, we'd be singing the same song, like,
oh my God, we have never talked about this. And I shit you not. If Darren was here, he'd be like, are you guys twins? Did you come from the same family? Because Darren will tell you without a shadow of a doubt that when we first started dating, he would come to family things and be like, what the fuck is happening? Those 3, meaning my mom, my sister, and I, are going to kill each other. And then we were turned around and like, we're hugging and loving. Yeah. I mean, I don't think my family didn't show a ton of anger, but we would get very animated,
Right.
and I noticed that with Liam and I. Like, I used to joke that I felt like I would say I felt like we were Italian because we would like fight and then immediately make up. But again, we were just letting it flow through us.
Yeah.
But Darren was blown away. He was like, what is actually happening here?
Oh, that's hilarious. This explains a lot, which we already know. We don't need to explain, but tempers. We have tempers that would flare. And my mom had she came from a family like that. My dad, I don't really know about my grandparents on that side, but my dad definitely. They were young parents and he was passionate. And so there was explosion and there was repair. And there was explosion and there was repair, but a lot of animation, a lot of passion. And so when we were first married, actually first dating, like if I got mad like that, he was like, whoa, she hates me. Or he would just like, wow, like really back off. And I'm like, we're just talking. We're just working this out. And so it wasn't that took some figuring out, like me, how to say that slightly nicer, and him how to just, really not take it personally and fight back, because he had a lot of room to fight back at me and really kind of engage.
Right.
But I think what I learned from that, because I did go into that thinking, oh, your parents had the best marriage, you never saw them fight. Mine did. But then I thought, no, because I think anger has so much good information for us. Mm-hmm. If you let it flow. I always say to my kids, anger is like a river. If it gets in an eddy where it's stuck and looping, that can get really unhealthy, dangerous. You can get sucked in and go to the bottom and hit your head on a rock. If I keep like belaboring this metaphor, but also, it can really, do damage to people nearby too. And I don't know how to make that part of the analogy, but like, that's when you start, taking it out on people. But if you can really follow it, it gets you to a truth that you need to get to, and it can get you to the actual emotion. Because I do think sometimes depression is anger turned inward, right?
Oh, yes.
And so sometimes if we don't feel it, we don't express it, and we don't find out what it is what is the justice that we need, what is the need not being met, then it just all goes inward. And then it gets to be this really low level depression that just goes on and on and on. So I used to think anger was like, ugh. And no one wants to be next to a hothead all the time, but right. I am now very welcoming of anger. And I even think early on as a parent with my oldest, I might've made him feel bad about expressing anger. And I wish I could go back and be like, go for it. And I did at some point, because I remember setting him outside, he would throw that baseball at the garage, and I just think, oh my God, he's going to dent the house. But it helps, right? Like to be able to go and not have someone follow you and just hit your pillow or hit something or just yell. Oh, that's a good release.
I will say one thing that struck me earlier when you talked about the voices of sadness and joy, and I said Lewis Black was anger.
Yeah.
It is in a nutshell. The only thing boys, at least of our generation and previous generations, were allowed to feel was anger. And so here the inside out shows up, and the man voice is anger.
Yeah,
women were not allowed to be angry, right? We could be sad, we could be happy, we could be joyful, but we weren't allowed to be angry.
And isn't that interesting? Because there was disgust, and that's just a mean form of anger, right? And so we're used to that, and that's a weird shrill role to
Mhm.
give females, even though I love Mindy Kaling. That's interesting that you say that. I hadn't even thought about
I
that.
hadn't either until you made the comment about sadness being a girl. And I was like, oh shit, Lewis Black was the voice. And I love Lewis Black, but
Yeah,
isn't that funny that the
that
anger
is.
voice was a male voice.
We're going to get to fear, but fear was a male voice too. Interesting.
I forget. Well, we don't have to, you don't have to
Yeah.
do you remember who the fear voice was? I forget who it was.
I
don't either.
don't.
So let's talk about grief. All right. I want to quote
Yeah.
again, because as I saw grief coming up, there is no better quote for grief than from WandaVision, which is, what is grief if not love persevering? I watched WandaVision pretty quickly after my mom died. And so that really hit me at the moment, when Vision says that. It is love, and I made reference to this in the last pod, but I think when we talk about emotionally bypassing, there are days when you're deep in grief that you wake up and everything's fine and you're happy. And I think there's that sort of survivor guilt when you have a happy day during grief. And because my parents died so quickly and I was in grief for a long time, while I am not a grief coach by any stretch of the imagination, I get it. And so when I'm talking to anybody around grief, I'm like, feel whatever emotion is coming up. If you are happy one day, allow yourself to be happy, because that sadness will wash over you again. So have whatever emotion you are having, even in the deepest grief.
Oh, I love that. It's interesting. I wasn't planning to talk about this, but you just opened this up for me, because what I was going to say was, grief is, love spilling out and going where it needs to go, right? Because it's all that love you can't keep giving that person when we're talking about grief after a loss. But I was thinking about the grief I experienced as the mom of a kid whose health is tenuous, right? So I have a kid with a seizure disorder, if you don't know me. And it has robbed him of the essential youth, that he would have had. His high school years have mostly been robbed by injuries and brain injuries and other physical injuries related to seizures and injuries. And we have it is an uncontrolled situation because it's a very rare form, and ongoing grief is part of it. And it is a really hard thing to explain to people who don't know exactly how, they either think, God, it must be horrible, or if they see me having a good day, they think things are fine. Right. And are fine. And it is literally a roller coaster. And we take all our guidance from him. He's this incredibly positive soul. And if he's having a good day, why not have a good day? Why ruin it by grieving what happened the day before and what might happen tomorrow? Right. And that grief is just born out of love and wanting so much more for him. So what I've learned is to allow yourself those pity parties, allow yourself those grief days. When you're feeling grief, let it flow, let it come, and maybe get some distance away from those who don't need to be part of it because they're having a good day too, but allow it, but also, don't spend all your time grieving, because if there's a good day to have, grab it. It's not something you go through that will just end someday. It will knock on your door over and over. I see that with my mom, having lost my dad, 11 years ago. Grief will become an old friend, and it's okay.
Yeah, it morphs. And I'm going to invite anyone listening here to do not let anybody tell you that you should stop grieving. Grief doesn't go away. It just morphs. And neither Kari and I are grief coaches, as I said, but we know them. So if you need a reference or a resource around grief, because the people in your life are telling you should be over it by now, put it in the Facebook or DM us, and we will hook you up with a grief coach, because that's what they do, is they help you in those moments where everybody else is telling you to shut the fuck up. Why am I the only one that cusses in these pods?
I've been saying shit, and I've been saying all kinds of stuff. What are you talking about?
I feel like I'm the only one dropping the F-bombs.
You'll go back and listen and realize that's not true.
Okay. All right. Fair. All right, speaking of fear. Oh, fear. The thing about fear, I think, is that
I think like there's a lot of things I think about fear. For one, we have a shared mentor who always says fear is just excitement on pause. And that's true, but I think there's different kinds of fear.
Yes.
Fear and sometimes just as humans, when we're rolling along and we're not really aware of how emotions take hold of us physically, we respond to all kinds of fear the same way. And then we pull back, and then we don't keep going. And sometimes fear is really important for you to not keep going because there's some danger that your intuition is telling you, don't cross that street, don't go into that building.
Yeah.
Don't, there's that commercial where those kids are like, they go into the barn with all the chainsaws hanging and you're like,
Yes,
don't
yes.
go in there. That's like,
Yeah.
fear is trying to get your attention. But there's other kinds of fear that are just coming up because it's new. And it is that critter brain, again, that part of you that's just afraid of anything new, but it's scaring you because if you get to the other side of it, it might be everything you want, right? And it's just new and you're afraid, oh, what if I don't get it? So fear sometimes shows us where our blind spots are. And I love that. I read that recently in a book by Mark Nepo. And he was talking about how because we all fear, because we're all human, we're all going to fear. And that means we all have blind spots. So fear is also just like all these other emotions. It's here to teach you something. Yeah. What you're afraid of might be one side of a coin. And on the other side is something you might be blind to that you really need, or you're really seeking. So for example, like if you fear heights, you might be blind to like the beauty of perspectives in nature, that you can get from different vantage points. If you fear spiders, you might be blind to the beauty of webs and the dangers that lurk in there, right? So like there's these other really cool things that are waiting for you that you might be blind to. I don't know. Does that resonate for you? Do you get that?
It does. I mean, I go fear in a different way. I mean, I go fear down the path of fearing the other. When I think of when I think of fear, I mean, yes, there's the phobias, right? Spiders. I'm scared of the Eiffel Tower. That's a whole nother pod. But it is. I think of the fear of the others, right? So, when I think about, I just finished reading Cast, and I don't want to go deep into this, but I just finished reading Cast, and one of the things that pointed out was, I've said this so many times in the last few years around like, why do white people sometimes vote against their own best interest? And it's because they fear that they will not be the dominant caste anymore. And they don't know that necessarily because we don't speak in those terms, but that's what it is. They will vote against their own best interest because they fear that they will be a minority or whatever. And they fear the other. You fear Muslims, you fear Black people, you fear LGBTQ. You
fear anything different.
Fear anything that's not you, know, and talk about blind spots, I mean, what are you missing because of your fear?
Right. When you fear change, your blind spot is evolution. Right. Yes. And so I love that. And I say that a lot. Like whenever my kids are sharing something they're confused about that they either see in the news or, in the world they live in the community they live in, I always say, I wonder what they're afraid of.
Yeah.
And, and I'm really grateful that I came to that realization at some point, because I definitely remember being around people who just look at what they're seeing on the news and they make a judgment, and and they don't even see that it's coming from their own fear of something new or something changing. And I really appreciate you saying that part, the fear of the other, because that's probably the best example of blind spots. But and I also feel like fear gets our attention for different reasons. And it's really important to understand like what that feels like, identify how that feels in your body, and then learn how to sort it. Is this the fear of excitement because I'm about to do stand-up comedy for the first time and it's just scary, but it's something I really, really want to conquer? Is this the fear of just not understanding these other people and I'm just afraid because it's different? Or is this a fear that someone might hurt me if I go into that corner or something, right? So like there are different fears, and learning the differences between them will change your life, really.
No
Otherwise-
question. I mean, it is another one of those situations of step back and ask a few questions. Now, in the moment, you might be walking down a street all by yourself and you see another human following you. Like, let's just go with your intuition on that one. But
Yeah.
in those moments where you're whatever, I mean, literally, again, a fucking rabbit hole I could go down, but it's, and I think too, one of the things I think about with the fear of other is, even as if you identify as I'm not like that, you constantly have to be looking at yourself and don't just assume you've got it all under control. The last one we have, which I kind of in some ways sounds similar to fear to me, is envy, jealousy, which is helping us understand what we are missing. Like that's, to me, it's compare and despair, right? Is that kind of the thought you were thinking?
Yeah, because I was hearing recently, like, admiration is inspiring you to want to be better yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
But envy and jealousy is really kind of feeling like you don't have something, right? And it hopefully it's here to teach us something we're missing that we can access. If we notice it, we can access it.
Yeah, and I'll to just quickly say, go back to compare and despair, because I'll and then we'll wrap this one up. Again, another mentor, not the same one, but of the same ilk, said, I heard her say once that when you're comparing and despairing, really take a look at that person you're comparing yourself to and despairing against. Are you willing to do the same things they're doing? So if you're looking at somebody and being like, I want that life, I want that, whatever it is, first of all, you probably don't know how they got there. So it's hard to really completely compare yourself. But if you know how they got there, are you willing to do the same things? And if you're not willing to do the same things, then you really can't compare yourself. It's not an apples to apples situation there. So, I think that's why I think it reminds me of fear, because there is that moment of step back and acknowledging where these particular emotions, fear, envy, jealousy, are coming from, because it is here to teach us something. And I don't know that fear, envy, jealousy, you can tell me if you feel differently, unlike grief, anger, unhappiness, sadness, bittersweetness, those flow. I think fear, envy, jealousy, you could take a step back from, figure out why it's happening, and then step away.
True.
I don't think you let that flow.
I think for me, anger and grief sometimes need more discovery from me. Like, where is it coming from? But again, I'm a projector, which, for people who don't know human design, like, sometimes I just have to make sure it's mine.
But, good point. Yeah.
With those two, right?
Yep.
So, but yeah, it's a really good point. I agree. Fear, envy, jealousy, absolutely. They show up. And again, I mean, this is what we want to say about these emotions and others. Everything is temporary. And I think that's like the message. If we had a message here, it's like, don't fear emotions, allow them, because it's temporary. Feel it. And know if it feels bad, it won't last. And if it's great, grab it, enjoy it, really, because things, emotions have a way of floating by, and you can get the lessons you want. You can feel the joy, and just know that tomorrow's another day. Right.
Yeah.
And I do love that. And I feel like there's the other thing about allowing any of these things that feel like pain, because there's a lot here that we talked about with pain, is when we can't transmute that, when we can't just turn that frown upside down, which is not what you and I are saying to do at all.
No.
We're saying embrace it, because sometimes that unhappiness, that sadness, that anger, that grief, that becomes the seed. I mean, think of some of the greatest music and art of a creative offering. So your struggle can become your greatest gift. So if you don't take time to enjoy it, you might be missing the root and like source of your next great thing.
And if you tamp it all down, as we started with, you could end up inflicting that pain on others.
Totally.
So this is definitely one we could do a part 2, and we might. I feel like a lot of our topics might have a part 2 at some point, but for now, thank you so much for listening. I'm Lisa Callahan. You are
Kari Morin.
And these are the things we know. Thanks for
Yay.
listening. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
See you next time.